Hey guys, so today we're going to be basically just reviewing everything we've learned about in the past few videos. So we started off by talking about variables. We talked about the 8 basic data types, the 4 most common: int, boolean, char, and double, as well as the other 4, which is float, long, short, and byte, and how what makes them all different is the amount of space they take up in your memory, of how int is 32 bits versus long is 64. We also talked briefly about string and how it's a little different from the basic data types, but it's a very fundamental one, and it's where you can store any kind of plain text. Then we talked about the different rules for naming variables, of how it has to start with a letter, you can't have a variable name with spaces in it, and how it cannot contain any special characters with the exception of the underscore and the $sign. And then we moved on to talk about the basic arithmetic operators, the plus sign, the subtraction, multiplication sign, and division sign, as well as the special modulus operator, which gives us the remainder of any division. And then we talked about the incrementing and decrementing operators, the plus plus and minus minus, where it basically increases your variable value by 1 and stores it back into the variable, and how these are used basically for ints. And also how there's a shorthand notation where instead of writing a equals a times 3, you could just do a times equal 3, and how you can do those with all 5 operators. And we also talked about the danger of integer division, that when you're dividing two ints, if it ends up to be a decimal, then it will truncate it. It'll just get rid of the decimal entirely. So it's always better to do double division and not to do integer division as much, unless you know for sure that it's going to be all nice numbers with no decimals. Then we moved on to talk about conditionals, about the comparison operators, like how there's the double equal sign that checks if two variables have the same value, greater than, less than, greater than equal to, or less than equal to. Then we talked about the basic if-else statement, where inside the if goes a condition, and if that condition is true, it'll enter this block. Otherwise, if that condition is false, then it'll enter the else block. And then we built upon that and talked about the else-if statement, where you can check for multiple conditions, and how it's a really good way, and you don't want to necessarily have a bunch of if statements. You should have more if, else if, and then else. And then we talked about the logical operators. And so first we have the and, which is a double ampersand sign, and basically it's when your first condition is true and then and your second condition is true, then the whole thing, the whole expression is going to evaluate to true, right? We also talked about the or and the not. So here we have an example. Our first condition, our second condition with an or, and then that whole thing encompassed by a not. We talked about how a not switches the value. So if your condition is true and then you put a not in front of it, then it'll become false, right? And also about how or is either one of the conditions has to be true. Keep in mind you can have many conditions. This doesn't have to be just 2 conditions. You can have 3 conditions or 4 conditions with and, or, and not. Then we moved on to talk about loops and how there's the for loop, while loop, and the do while loop. And this is what the for loop looks like. And the while loop has a condition you're checking for. And the do while is special because it'll do at least 1 iteration before checking the condition. And then we talked about the continue and the break keywords, where continue is after it's used, then it'll continue to the next iteration and not execute any of the code that comes after it's been used, while break will completely exit you out of the loop. And finally, we talked about good old arrays and how you have to specify the data type, and arrays can only have one type of data in them, so you can only have a double array or a boolean array or a string array. And how if you want to access an element in the array, then you use the array name, and with square brackets you put whatever position you're trying to access, and how arrays are indexed starting from 0 all the way till the length -1, and that a length is fixed once you specify whatever length it is, that can't be changed, and how we often use for loops to iterate through the entire array and access all of the elements in the array. A quick note, as you can see, I've been writing down all of our code along with comments that kind of explain what we've been going over. If you want to access this code, then you can go ahead to Chrome, and if you search up Aztec Robotics 6479 GitHub, then you'll see that the first link that pops up is our GitHub. And when you click on that and you go to repositories, you'll see a Java tutorial code. And in there, you'll see a bunch of our code all put in there. And so if you ever want to reference back to it and kind of just see what you've been learning about, then that's a really good place to check it out. Awesome, so we went through and covered a lot of fundamental Java material. Give yourselves a pat on the back. We just learned a whole lot, and it's great that you stuck with it so far. We're going to be moving on to a whole other segment in Java and learn a bunch of new cool stuff. So I'll see you guys in the next section.